What's going on, everyone? I hope you had a great Labor Day weekend. Welcome to CFL 110 here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk channel, proudly presented by our partners at CoolBet, where the lines for the rematch weekend are already up. We will get to some picks in the second half of the program, but first get to another wild weekend, maybe the biggest weekend of the year in the CFL. Pleasure to welcome in my pal Jeff Hamilton from the Winnipeg Free Press, who was also in Regina on the weekend for the big game in the Labor Day Classic, the Battle of the Prairies. And Hammer, just before we get to the games, a really, really fun weekend, something that I think every CFL fan should be a part of, whether you're going to the game in Southern Ontario or Alberta, or preferably the big one in Regina. I got to say, Labor Day really felt back this year, the biggest and best event by far since the pandemic. And both Rider fans and Bomber fans showed up big time in the middle of the country.
Yeah, we teased this, Huss, as the biggest weekend, at least in the regular season, as far as the Canadian Football League schedule goes. And I thought it really did deliver. We'll get into the games individually, some pretty exciting endings here. But I was really grateful to be in Regina for a 10th straight year. 10th straight game. It was interesting. I remember my first one was the first one as a media member. I've gone to a few in my late teens and early 20s. But as a media member, my first one was the 50th Classic. And of course, this one was the 60th Classic. And then again, I don't think it disappointed one bit. I do agree with you. I do think the Labor Day Classic is back in a sense. Certainly, it was a lot crazier prior to COVID-19 for understandable reasons, but it's kind of slowly but surely made its way back. And I felt like this year was the big representation from Winnipeg. I thought Winnipeg fans came out in droves. The weather cooperated, Huss. I know there were some people who had issues with the weather, but plus 30 degrees on September long, I'll take that any day of the week. So it was a terrific weekend. Really enjoyed seeing Bomber fans out. Really enjoyed the passion of Rider fans. And of course, the whole weekend was just one great one. I took yesterday off to recover, and now I'm ready to go this week for what will be an awesome slate of Week 14 matches. But before that, let's break down last week.
Yeah, I know you were up in the press box. I was, of course, in the stands. We brought a couple buses out of listeners and friends out to the game. And listen, it was just apparent, like the second we got into Regina, that the Winnipeg presence in Regina was a lot greater this year. I mean, the Bombers do a great job on the Saturday night every year before Labor Day by inviting all Bomber fans to come down to a bar called Crave. They had the cheerleaders out there. Wade Miller was there. They give you a drink ticket to everyone, basically buy a beer for all the Bomber fans there. And it was shoulder to shoulder. I mean, you could simply not move in there. So anyways, it was the stage was set for an amazing weekend. And then the game delivered. We've talked a lot about just how crazy the series is and how you can often just throw out the records at Labor Day. In a lot of ways, it was a sort of tale of two, maybe three games with a great start for the Bombers, the Riders completely taking over that football game and essentially being home and done. And then one mistake on a punt return gives Winnipeg the opportunity to come back in. And this came right down to the wire. But a pretty poor 2-point attempt with the game on the line, to be frank, ended up being the difference. It ended up being a pick two the other way to actually cover some people's 4-point spreads. Luckily, we got it at 4.5. But this is a really disappointing way to end a game where there were so many positives for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers overall. But at the end of the day, you just have to tip your cap to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They were the better team on Sunday and certainly deserved to win the win. And they're back on top of the CFL West.
We often talk a lot about personalities of games, Huss, and it looked like this one was a multi-personality game.
Yeah.
It was just, the start I thought was obviously strong for Winnipeg. Taking a 10-0 lead is super important in any game, getting that up to an early lead, but it's particularly important when you're up against such a crowd. That was the case in Riderville. They packed the house. There was a lot of blue dotted throughout, but it was certainly a sea of green in the majority of a more than 34,000 person crowd. So that was certainly they had that against them. And then, as you mentioned, the swing, the Riders outscored the Bombers 31-7 to take a 2 touchdown lead into the fourth quarter, really into the final 5 minutes. And that's when all hell broke loose, right? At that point in time, And I think this is why, I think people get upset when you say the Bombers, from the Riders saying that the Bombers could have won this game because of the errors they made. The reality is both sides will be looking at a couple different plays that they want back, and the Riders will probably look at, first and foremost, when you look at the late game comeback for Winnipeg, the Mario Alford fumble right on the return. This is a punt return for Saskatchewan. This is they're up 2 touchdowns. They're going to have the ball, and they punch the ball out there. Kyrie Wilson gets it, and that gives the Bombers life. Well, only a handful of plays later, Zach Collaros is hitting Carrick Wheatfall for a 33-yard touchdown in the back corner of the end zone. It's now a 7-point game. Right there, Huss, you're thinking, okay, well, all they really need is another touchdown, but they need a heck of a lot of good luck here too, right? And credit to the defense at the end who managed to put Saskatchewan in what I would say a very difficult situation, Huss, at the end there, in not going for what would have been a 51-yard field goal for Brett Lowther, and instead pulling out some trickery with Trevor Harris, quarterback Trevor Harris, with what do you call it, the pooch punt, or however you want to describe it, the quick kick, punting it, and then resulting in what looked to everybody in the stadium for a good chunk of time, a safety on Dietrich Nichols, right? That punt went over everyone's head. They didn't have anyone back. Defensive back or halfback Dietrich Nichols goes and gets the ball. Looks like he retrieves it in bounds, but then goes into the end zone on his own volition and gets tackled there for what is called originally a safety. And a safety in that situation is pretty much game over, right? You can't go from the difference between 7 and 9 points is the difference between 1 and 2 scores. Well, of course, the command center comes in. They make the argument that Dietrich Nichols was in, his momentum was coming out of the end zone, or rather his momentum pushed him back into the end zone. That then resulted in a 1-point rouge, which gave the Riders a point, which kept the game within 1 score and 8 points, but more importantly, gave the Bombers the ball on their own 40-yard line. And of course, a 57-yarder defensive pass interference on Nick Dembski. Jackson Ford, the safety in Saskatchewan, was having nightmares over that one. Sets up what turns out to be another touchdown drive, this one to Dalton Schoen. And then, of course, as you alluded to at the end there, Huss, the 2-point convert, the difference between tying this game and sending it to overtime is what I would argue a bad call. It was picked off by Campbell, Davon Campbell, ex-NFLer, who returns it all the way to the other end zone for what we're calling a pick 2, because that's what it is, 2 points. And, of course, at the end, it looked like they might have got the onside kick. It certainly didn't lack drama on that kick, but it was ultimately ruled a Riders' ball. And here we are talking about a crazy ending that you can make the argument, Haas, the Bombers had no business being in that game. Some smart situational football from Saskatchewan likely would have prevented it. But here we are. This is the crazy football league for a reason, and what a comeback Winnipeg had. But what is your takeaway in that? Do the Bombers, to you, do they salvage any of this? Because what if we're talking about a 10-point or 2 touchdown loss versus what was obviously a very, very exciting but improbable finish?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the Alford fumble, and credit to the Bombers for making things happen at the time. But, I mean, the game was essentially, it felt like it was already lost then. I mean, I joke with people, the Bombers had no business whatsoever covering that number when you think about how basically the middle 45 minutes of the football game had gone. But they found themselves with an opportunity to stay in it, and credit to them. And I thought Zach Collaros really stepped up late in the game to get them in that position. But, I want to back up a little earlier, because to me, I think the biggest win for the Saskatchewan Roughriders that really started the momentum going the Sask way was a coaching decision by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers early on. You mentioned about that 10-0 lead. Well, listen, they got the first touchdown. Then they got a strip sack and got a fumble inside the 10-yard line, basically starting on the Saskatchewan 5, up 7-0. Zach Collaros never even saw the field. They rolled in with Chris Streveler as quarterback and Brady Oliveira. They ran the ball twice, ending up just inside the 2-yard line, and then decided to bring out the field goal kicker. And from my perspective, Jeff, that was The second that Sergio Castillo walked onto the field, you could feel the relief, I would say, amongst the fans, and I think on the Rider bench as well. And, on the road against a great team like Saskatchewan in that environment, to me, you have to be aggressive. It's not lost upon me that the final difference in the score of the football game was 4 points. And the difference between getting a touchdown at that point and settling for a field goal, 4 points as well. I get what Mike O'Shea said, that you have to take advantage of that turnover and have something on the board. I would argue that the ability to go for it on third down and punch it in would have been such a big boost for Winnipeg. And worst case scenario, you have this Riders starting the football on the 1 yard line in the shadow of their end zone, and you get an opportunity for the defense to get the ball back right now. I understood what they were thinking when they went out there in that position. But to me, when you're doing that with a short 5 yards with 3 downs to do it, you need to be committed to going for the touchdown. And to me, they went 2/3 of the way, backed off a little bit. And I thought that was a big boost for Saskatchewan. And we saw them really from that moment on completely flip the game on Winnipeg and really not look back until the fumble allowed Winnipeg back into the game in the dying minutes.
Yeah, Huss, hindsight's always 20/20. And when you look at the score here, particularly at the end, you start thinking to yourself, okay, those are the points that would make up this game. But in that moment, I think a lot of people are, what are you doing? Like, why stop here? A couple different things, right? This team has been aggressive this year. Whether you want to look at the attempt at the pass that got picked off in that Toronto game at home earlier in the season, that was an aggressive play call. Almost cost the Bombers the game. You look at the play call against Ottawa at the end of with a minute left in that game and marching out Sergio Castillo for a 57-yard field goal to put it away. That was aggressive. And then in this moment, understanding that there's going to be momentum swings in this game, understanding that the Riders are going to score points against you, settling for 3 on the doorstep was a joke. Like, it was an absolute farce. Like, you can understand the argument about points are going to be critical in this game, and surely, that's true to a certain degree. But when you're going to be up against it, when your defense has been playing as well as they had been, I get it's early in the game, Haas, but the defense had just created a turnover. They were in Harris's kitchen. The Riders looked almost kind of shell-shocked to start that game. Maybe the moment being too big, the pressure being too heavy, and to just trot out your kicker there. You mentioned the exhale from the crowd and probably a majority of the Riders bench. I think you had Winnipeg's bench wondering, what the heck are we doing here? Like, why are we settling for 3 points? And just to revisit what you said earlier, Huss, was how the hell is Zach Collaros not on the field for any of those plays? Like, if Chris Streveler is coming in, why aren't you just putting your head down and rushing the guy through the front line for 2, 4, 6? Like, why aren't you setting yourself? Like, I mean, you could argue that's what they did, was trying to set themselves up potentially for a 1 yard QB push if, given they ran twice before that. But it was just garbage play calling by Jason Hogan, the offensive coordinator, which ended up becoming a theme throughout the game. And the reality is that the moment getting too big for the Riders, that wasn't the case. The moment it got too big for Jason Hogan, who just clearly is so out of his element right now as the offensive play caller for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, that you look at some of these plays and you think that somebody who is just a fan on the side could make better decisions, right? Like, it's almost like you're overthinking these things. Zach Collaros is your best player, right? He's the guy who he knows the plays, he knows the coverages. To take him out of the game and put up Chris Streveler, who, in my opinion, has kind of taken a couple steps back here in recent weeks and might not even be the best short yardage guy for Winnipeg, was just a dumb move. And that was just the first of, as I mentioned, a few here, Huss. When you look later in that first half with 41 seconds remaining at Saskatchewan's 35-yard line, facing a second in inches, you want to get cute? You want to get cute and put Zach Collaros in a shotgun and then have the D-line pin their ears back, knowing there's 41 seconds and that you're already in field goal range? What do? Huss, they sacked Winnipeg for 7 yards, and that forces out a 50-yard field goal. And Sergio Castillo, who has been money for most part this year, particularly from distance, is still human. right? So he was vulnerable on that in front of a massive crowd that is screaming at the top of their lungs, and he kicks it wide right, and there's no points there. And if you want to fast forward even more so to the end of the game, Huss, look, I know Zach Collaros pretty well and long enough to know that when he says at the end of the game they call a play that everybody in the league calls, he's telling you it was the wrong play call and it was easily picked off. To me, this was a game that the Bombers could have won. They shouldn't have won in the last 5 minutes. So certainly credit to, at the end there in the rush. But I think this was a game of some self-made errors and some self-made mistakes that maybe in previous weeks didn't cost them. This one absolutely did in what was a pivotal game against a heated rival in a hostile environment.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're on the road against a first-place team as an underdog. I mean, you do have to take a few chances, I think, and get a little aggressive. Now, to your point about the play at the end of the second quarter, I mean, I'm here for being aggressive and maybe being willing to throw that football. We can debate the call. I will say this, Zach Collaros cannot take a sack there. I mean, you just simply have to have the awareness that, it's getting a little too hot here. Throw the football away. I mean, taking the sack and losing the 8 to 9 yards, which turned a 41 or 2 yarder into the wind into a 50 plus, probably was the biggest factor in not getting 3 points to show for it. And every one of those points was so valuable. And as far as the end of the game goes, I took Zach's post-game comments the same way. I mean, he owned it himself, but you could tell that they just simply weren't on the same page. And hell, when you got a quarterback with that much experience in it, I mean, what do you like? I mean, I would almost put it into his hands as opposed to just going for one of the bread and butter plays of CFL teams, knowing that that's the play that Zach's had pick six a couple times this year. That just doesn't seem the best opportunity for him to get the job done. And it didn't work. It was a wild one, though. And of course, the teams are coming right back at it in the Banjo Bowl this Saturday here in Winnipeg. The other game, and, we were all driving back. We were on a bus, so we had the phones out with the game on. And truly a Labor Day classic between the Argos and the Ticats. This was such a fun football game, Jeff, and it went back and forth. And, almost out of, professional wrestling or WWE, there was a bunch of near falls at the end. And then the finishing move by Nick Arbuckle at the end of the game in one of the more bizarre plays that you'll see, where there was a question whether the game was over or whether they would have the final second to kick the winning field goal. But to me, this was an offensive air show throughout. Nick Arbuckle continues his brilliant season, 33 of 40, 352 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. And meanwhile, Mr. Labor Day, Bo Levi Mitchell, who's now 7-1 on Labor Day, 405 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. But it wasn't enough because the Toronto Argonauts simply refused to lose. And dare I say, the Argos have a little bit of life in their season at 4-8 now, coming off 2 straight wins.
Well, a lot of that too happened down the stretch, right? It was a fairly, I don't want to call it necessarily a defensive battle, but through the first half was more so than it was in the second half. And it was like these teams realized that there was 2 points up for grabs here, right? And look at the Kenny Lawler show in the fourth quarter. Look at the look at the change in comebacks. I think that's the difference here. As I think we'll end up remembering the Winnipeg and Saskatchewan ending more than this one. But when it comes to improbable outcomes, I mean, this one to me, this rivaled like one of those games with one of those endings like Milt Stegall catching one in Edmonton, right, and going the 101 yards or whatever it was at the end of the game, right? It was just splitting those two defense. So when you're looking at the situation from Hamilton's perspective, you're like, wow, what a comeback, right? Like talk about delivering in the last moments for your, in front of the home crowd, in front of a heated rival, and ultimately really not ending Toronto's playoff hopes, but certainly damaging them, only to then be upset in a massive way, right? Like Casantonis on that play, when like, first of all, it was insane that he even delivered the pass on that play, Huss, but you need to move the ball. You don't have many options. You can't take a sack, but to deliver that ball, Casantonis, the safety, a guy who's made tons of plays for Hamilton over his career, and particularly this season. He always seems to come up big in these moments. He seems to be the helping with Moxie beside him, and there's just a complete miscommunication. It's almost as if they never imagined that you could possibly come up with a catch and get her done. But the crazy stuff wasn't even like as incredible and as improbable as the catch seemed to be, right? It was one of those pretty much catches off the helmet was for Brissett. It was what happened after that had everybody going, what is happening here, right? This guy's won the game, then he's lost the game, then it turns out he's won it again. Like, you have him, like, once you catch that ball, you talk about situational football. Everybody in that huddle knows that if you get into field goal range, you need to get out of bounds. Like, this is we're talking a matter of seconds here. Brissett's on nothing but open end zone and glory and all those things, and to dive the way he did, and then to hit to think he had a touchdown and have it taken away because he stepped out of bounds, and they had to go check to make sure when he stepped out of bounds there was enough time, and sure enough there was enough time. You could see the teammates on the sideline go from really excited to kind of pissed off to confused to jubilation again, right? I think, it would be really interesting. I mean, that to me is divine intervention, Huss, that there was half a second left on the clock when his foot touches the white at about the 2 or 3 yard line, which then obviously allows Liram Haralahu to come in and kick a field goal very similar to the one that Sergio Castillo nailed in the conversation we're having for the victory, for the walk-off. Like, can you imagine being in the film room the next day if you stepped out when there was 0 seconds left, and how you'd have to explain to your coaches, to your teammates, all those things? But surely that wasn't the case, and here we are, man. Like, that was to me the most improbable, crazy. I could just imagine how the home fans felt in that one, and of course how the visitors would have felt. What a crazy ending! What a crazy turnaround! And to your point at the end, what a significant victory for the Argos, who are now 4-8, because the Ticats are leading the East at 6-5. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, we're talking about how tough their season is, how challenging it's been for them. They would be in tie for first place right now in the East. That's the situation that's going on there, and I think it's got whole new life in the Argos after an improbable victory like that.
Yeah, that one. I mean, listen, there was a game was it a year or two ago, a Bombers BC, where Dominique Rhymes exactly went in and thought he was going to get there. The clock ended. They ended up making the game-saving tackle, and the Bombers ended up winning that football game. And listen,
that's the game we were talking about. I believe it was Red Hawk Cramdy who whiffed on the tackle. And I remember Mike O'Shea making the argument after the game. I was in BC for that game. I remember making the argument that Cramdy noticed because he couldn't take him down and pulled his hand away the last second of the game, which he may or may not have done, but it was hilarious because that was, again, you're thinking, you got the adrenaline going. You're thinking, especially in that one, you can win with the touchdown. You just, all of a sudden, all those things you talked about seconds before the huddle just go out the window, and that's human error at its finest.
So, I mean, listen, you start off with 2 absolutely incredible all-time thrillers. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, because the third game was a bit of a dud. And this was just simply Calgary flexing and proving what we've been seeing week after week after week all season long, that even when the offense is not clicking at a really high level, scoring points against the Calgary Stampeders in 2025 is pretty damn hard. And listen, they had their way with the Edmonton Elks offense pretty much all game long. I mean, I thought Cody Fajardo was, valiant in his efforts. He was able to move the football at times, but this was just simply Edmonton moving up a few weight classes from the teams that they'd been beating in the East to a team that has shown that they've got an answer for just about everybody this year, with the exception of the Ottawa Redblacks. And, Calgary gets the win without much drama whatsoever. And Edmonton cools off a little bit after that 3-game win streak to sort of get some hope back into their season.
Yeah, Edmonton kind of comes back to life here, Huss, right? A lot of excitement hanging into this game, been on a few-game win streak, have kind of made their way back into the conversation in the West. Still wasn't going to be easy, but that's the reason why we're talking about them, because more losses would have probably eliminated them, not mathematically, but realistically. This to me was just, we're seeing a team in Calgary who's playing three-phase football, right? We know what they've been able to do with Vernon Adams and offense, and I would say this would be one of those games. Might even be Vernon Adams' worst game of the season. Still managed to have Dedrick Mills run for over 100 rushing yards. You look at the. We know how great this defense has been. This is by far, in my opinion, the best defense in the CFL. They just don't let you score touchdowns, right? I mean, it's reminiscent of the 21 Winnipeg Blue Bombers, where you could kind of get into their zone, but you were never getting into the end zone. And that's really, when a team is constantly scoring threes instead of sevens, that changes, if not decides, games. So there's that. And then you have Eric Brooks, who returns a punt, or punt or kickoff. I think it was a punt for a touchdown. You have the special teams adding, making a big impact in these games and getting them strong field position. So, this is a team to me that's just complete. They're getting better, which is a scary thing to think of. Congratulations to Adam Bighill, who also made his debut this season. For him to get back onto the field, I know that was an emotional victory for him after what he went through in Winnipeg last year, obviously destroying his knee in the Banjo Bowl last season. So to be almost a year to the date, just 1 week short of that, or 1 week ahead, I should say, of schedule for that year, the year anniversary, I think is an incredible achievement for him. He said he would do it, and he's done that. But yeah, things are just rolling in Calgary. And after a couple tough seasons, this team is going to be the one to beat. I know Saskatchewan is there at 9-2. But the 8-3 Stamps, I mean, they're coming, and they already have the season series over Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. So it puts a lot of pressure on the Riders, the way the Stamps are playing right now. But I love that there's a 2-horse race up there. Winnipeg's going to have to try to get in there. There is room to make. There is time, I believe. There is time to catch up, especially with the 2 games against Saskatchewan at home in this season still. So, but Calgary, I mean, they do what they need to do. Sometimes they're boring, but most often they're effective, and that's the recipe you need in this league, is to just be consistent, and the belief is there. And when you're playing three-phase football, I think that's really the big issue. Was the big issue throughout the weekend, even with the team, even a team like the Saskatchewan Roughriders, right? They didn't have, one phase wasn't necessarily picking up the other. It was almost kind of what's going to happen next year, right? You never really knew what was going to happen. Whereas in Calgary, that level of consistency in all 3 phases, there's a calmness, and when you're executing the way they are, you ride to easy victories, even against teams like Edmonton, who had shown a lot of punch. I think that a lot of talk after this, and I'll admit I had this thought run through my head too, where you're not thinking. You mentioned like Cody Fajardo was able to do some things. I wasn't saying, like, I'm certainly not putting the onus on him, the blame on him, but Calgary is one of those teams, and you often hear it, especially late in games. It's not easy to do what Winnipeg did this week. And I think that's why you got to give them some credit here, is because when you put good defensive lines, you put good defenses in positions where you often hear this, they're able to just pin their ears back and send the house and come after you. Well, Calgary's doing that with 3 rushers, right? Like they're getting damage done. And when you put yourself in those situations late in game and they can rush 4, you're almost screwed. It's like you can't do anything. You don't have enough time to move the ball. So my long-winded point in that, Huss, is, were you thinking Trey Ford might be coming out in that final quarter? Because my mind certainly went there. And I thought if you were going to go back to him, not as like a philosophical move or like a change in what you're going to be doing moving forward, but just maybe an opportunity to show some spark and some life on what was a punishing front. I thought Trey Ford, I thought it was a bit of a missed opportunity to bring Trey Ford in there in the 4th quarter and see what he could do under those kind of conditions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I thought about it for a minute, but then I thought about the way this team has looked with Trey Ford this year and the way with Cody Fajardo, and it kind of feels like it's already Cody's team. And this was a huge game, and you know what? He certainly was still fighting for every single play, and I wouldn't hang it on him, and I still don't really see many scenarios that Trey Ford gives them a better chance to do positive things than Cody's doing right now. And I imagine it'll be a lot of Cody Fajardo again at the 2 matches on the weekend. Just quickly, I mean, I'll pull this back to Winnipeg for a minute. You mentioned what Calgary's been able to do. I mean, good teams like Saskatchewan, continued to go back and tried to establish the run. And even when it wasn't happening, they didn't abandon it like the Winnipeg Blue Bombers did with their best player, Brady Oliveira, who ended up with 5 carries on the game and another 5 touches through the air. We'll see whether that continues this weekend when both of those Western matchups are revisited in the other venues. But we do have 4 games. We're back to the full 4-game slate and a triple header on Saturday with the NFL starting with their first full slate of games. Let's head over to our friends at Coolbet and check out what we've got cooking for the weekend. And by the way, I'll just quickly shout out the boys at Coolbet. For those of you that do like our NFL pick segments, 10 a.m. Fridays, myself, Jake, and Pat will be doing the WST winners segments live every Friday, 10 a.m. Winnipeg time, which will be fun. Of course, if you haven't played at Coolbet, you want to jump on right now and you haven't played there before, use the promo code WST. It'll hook you up with a 100% bonus up to $200 for your first deposit. If you're a returning cool better, just looking to maybe add to the stack or get going for the season, they do have a $50 reload bonus. So if you bet $50, you'll get another $50 free if you use the promo code RELOAD25. So jump on that. You can check out the details on the Coolbet social channels as well. Let's start off with the Lone Friday game, Hammer. And it's 2 teams that didn't participate on the weekend, coming off the bye. The BC Lions into Ottawa, taking on the Red Blacks. A massive game for both teams. BC mired in 4th right now in the West. Ottawa, their season on life support. BC, a 4.5-point favorite on the road in the nation's capital. You like BC to win by 5 or more? Is this one going to be closer or potentially an Ottawa win?
So is it BC right now that's +5? Or
BC
sorry,
minus
-5 on the road. So I think to your point early on, yeah, I should have automatically assumed as much. I don't love Ottawa right now, but I don't love BC either. And I think, BC is a team, to your point, both of these teams are in desperation mode, right? You have back-to-back games against each other. Barring a split, I suppose, might just keep them both out of the playoffs, but neither team can get swept in this situation. So you look at this game, Nathan Rourke versus, we don't know yet. We don't know yet, right? Right now, Bobby Dice said, head coach of the Red Blacks, has not ruled out Drew Brown with a knee injury, but that to me is not necessarily good news either, right? At what point, would Drew Brown be 100% by the end of this week if he doesn't practice? What percentage would you be getting? Would that be enough? I look at the 5 points. I look at Ottawa, and I don't know, Huss. I really don't know. I tend to believe that Nathan Rourke could pick apart this defense. I tend to think that the BC Lions will learn from their mistakes, but from the last time they played, which was a horrible ending there, they didn't do well in their last outing. So I'm undecided by both these teams, and I'm going to put some more trust in Ottawa, I think, which doesn't feel good. If it was three points, I would be easily on the BC Lions right now. I just think with too many question marks for both teams, and you're looking at 5-point game, I think, and especially when you look at the desperation and how difficult it is to win on the road. I'm going to very, 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 very cautiously go with the Ottawa Red Blacks. Even as I drag out my sentence here, Huss, I'm waiting to just say, no, this is a bad play, but I'm going to stick with it and go with the Ottawa Red Blacks.
Listen, I don't mind, listen, there's this part of me that says, you know what, like in these situations, more often than not, just take the home dog, take the points. Good chance it might be a close game. I'm going to be on the other side in this one. And again, I don't feel great about it, but I just think back to 2 weeks ago in BC's last game, in that game in Toronto. They came out, looked great, touchdowns on their first couple drives. They're up by 8. And then the roof caved in on their defense. They ended up giving up 52 to Nick Arbuckle. But again, this is what Nick Arbuckle and the Toronto Argonauts are doing right now. It is an air show that continued against a good Hamilton team on the weekend. So I'm putting my faith in Nathan Rourke in this one. I think he'll be the best player on the field. And as I say, I think both of these teams are flawed in some ways, but the fact that BC had the time off, I think they'll be focused. I think they'll have a real chip on their shoulder after what happened the last time they traveled out east. So I will hold my nose a little bit. I don't like the number, but I'll take BC -4.5. The start of the triple header is a noon game Central Time in Montreal. Hamilton and the Alouettes, the top two teams in the East. This is a game that will feature the Ticats coming off a monster performance by Bo Levi Mitchell in that crazy loss on Labor Day against a Montreal team coming off a bye, Jeff, but still likely without Davis Alexander. And for me, you wonder if Montreal can show anything like they were earlier in the season if Alexander isn't behind center. He was limited in practice. I mean, considering what he's dealing with, I don't expect him back this year. This line with Hamilton 4-point favorites on the road tells me as much. And I got to say, I think the bad taste of what happened last week with the Argo game will carry over into this one with the Hamilton. And I think that they keep the foot on the gas throughout the game to avoid any last-second hijinks. To me, with Bo Levi Mitchell in, Davis Alexander out, it's a huge advantage to Hamilton. And despite the fact that Montreal will probably have a good crowd for this game, to me, Hamilton, as long as Davis Alexander is out, Hamilton is in another echelon to me right now. Even though the Montreal defense is good, I'm going to take the Ticats in this one to have a big bounce back performance after that Labor Day heartbreaker.
I don't know why anybody would put their hard-earned money on a Montreal Alouettes team that doesn't have Davis Alexander. What we've seen with this team without Alexander behind center has been few good performances. McLeod Bethel-Thompson what was able to carve out a victory weeks ago. That feels like it's far in the rearview mirror. The Alouettes are falling in the standings. They still are second place because the two other teams chasing them have 4 and 3 wins respectively between Toronto and Ottawa. So this is a playoff game, Huss. Like, this is a battle for first place. The Hamilton Ticats have taken their knocks here the last little bit. They need to get back in the win column here and get those good feelings back. And fortunately for them, that's what Montreal's been doing for a lot of teams. They've been giving them their mojo back, right? It was Winnipeg who a time before that, or the week before the Labor Day last week, was able to go in there and regain their confidence, right? Be able to do the thing. It was a vintage Blue Bombers performance after what's been a season of anything but, right? So I see the same thing here. I see a pissed off Hamilton Ticats team going in to that game and performing. Here's the part that gives me a little bit of pause, okay? Is that the Alouettes are coming off the bye, right? They're going to be rested. Meanwhile, Hamilton has played Monday, right? Now they're up against on a Saturday early game. So that's already a short week. So if we're, and especially when you consider it's going to be in Montreal, so you have to travel. I'm not saying it's a big travel day for Hamilton, but they might be in it a little bit here. I just don't think that the spread is big enough for them to make up for it. Again, another reason for pause for those people who want reasons to take, believe that Montreal's going to cover the spread. This is a team that was a 3-point game against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers before they hit their stride and their defense couldn't hang on, right? And that defense couldn't hang on. The Montreal's defense is a good defense, and all they probably really need, Huss, to be competitive is an offense who doesn't necessarily, score a bunch of points or goes on a bunch of scoring drives, but can at least sustain drives and keep them off the field, right? They're not going 2 and out and putting more pressure on their defense. I just still don't think they get that without Davis Alexander. And for those reasons, I'm taking the Hamilton Ticats with you. And I do think they get back in their winning ways. I don't think it's going to be a beat down, but I do think it's one of those games where we're going to see Montreal trying to scrape their way back and still fall by the spread.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think Hamilton, with the way Bo's playing and Kenny Lawler, I think they'll be putting up in the high 20s. And the bottom line is, can Montreal get to 24, 25? to cover that number. I'm dubious on it. I will take the Ticats, which brings us to the Banjo Bowl, 3 p.m. sold out Princess Auto Stadium. I can tell you that the scene is going to be similar to last weekend in Regina, although a little bit cooler. We had that great weather in Regina. It's definitely cooled off this week in this part. So we're probably looking at around a daytime high of about 17. So it'll feel a little different. But the participants will be the same. Winnipeg and Saskatchewan coming here. This, Hammer, this is a pick 'em. And this is exactly kind of where I thought this would be. On a neutral field, certainly Saskatchewan would be a favorite. They played a really close game last week. Now it heads down the number one highway here to Winnipeg for this one. And certainly the Bombers are going to have the support of the crowd, which is always significant in the Banjo Bowl. And I would suggest they're going to need that to get that win. I mean, part of me thinks that, they kind of used their fair share of miracles last week to get in and fall just short. And to me, the Riders kind of come in playing with house money. But this is a building and a series that the Bombers have been very, very successful in. The spread pretty much tells you all you need to know. It's a pick 'em. Who you got in the Banjo Bowl, Hammer?
Yeah, I feel like this is the weekend of not feeling great about my picks, Haas. But I for this, to some of the reasons you mentioned, I do think that Winnipeg did use up some of those miracle plays, used up some of their luck, if you will. But I do think, as you mentioned, playing in front of a packed house at Princess Auto Stadium is going to be a lot different. They're going to have their crowd behind them. They're going, which means the Rough Riders are going to deal with the same issues that Winnipeg had to deal with at Mosaic Stadium with the raucous crowd. And so if the crowd can be loud enough, that could throw their offense off their game. I thought that for the most part, Winnipeg was able to keep Trevor Harris in check for a lot of that game, right? He's had about 219 passing yards, which isn't typical of Trevor Harris, and had a completion percentage sub 70%, right? And then throw in Brett Lothar into the mix on how they sheltered him. We'll see see how he can do this week. I'm not suggesting it's going to be a convincing win from Winnipeg, but I do think that Winnipeg gets this victory. I do think Winnipeg is going to be pissed off. I do think that they are going to learn from some of the mistakes they made in this past week's game, and most importantly, play well at home, right? And this is a big game for Winnipeg. They're 6-5 right now. They don't want to be going. They want to be trending the right way. And while the Riders are a good team and they're going to be a tough opponent here, they need to get to 7-5 before they get to 6-6, right? Because they have the BC Lions right there with them at 5-6. So this is a big game for Winnipeg, and they don't like this team. I thought that even though it took some heroics at the end, Zach Collaros had a great game, all things considered, right? 326 passing yards. But what they need to, and what you mentioned before, Haas, that we didn't really get into, was they need to lean on Brady Oliveira a lot more in this game. They need, like, this idea that, just like I don't think you can necessarily say it didn't work for Winnipeg to attack the air, because we know that Saskatchewan has been susceptible, especially this past week in their secondary. They had Lacombo out at safety. They had Marcus Sales coming back. So he wasn't at, maybe 100%, but hadn't played in a little bit. So he might be off. So I think that it was the right choice to take advantage of that. But this game, you need to establish the run. You need to take the home crowd, that momentum, and Brady needs to be pushing through that line, right? Montreal was a great defense. Saskatchewan has a great defense. You need to do the same thing. So I think the focus needs to be on that. And I think you're going to have a team that's pissed off that they weren't able to, even though it was an improbable comeback they almost completed. I think they're going to be pissed off that they didn't complete it, and that's going to be enough to just edge out a victory against like I said, a good Riders team.
Well, and listen, I think the Winnipeg Blue Bombers can look back at what their opponents did last week for a couple things. I mean, so let's speak about the running game. I mean, early on in the football game, they were giving it to A.J. Ouellette on first down, and he was going for 2 yards, 3 yards. And, then the Bombers were doing a good job of getting them off the field. Saskatchewan never wavered from their commitment to the run and kept on giving it to him and kept on giving it to him. And then by the time you got into the second half, when they had the lead, they were starting to get those big 8, 7, 12-yard runs on first down. I mean, Ouellette ended up with 18 carries for 89 yards, a 4.9 average. Brady Oliveira had a 4.8-yard average, but he only touched it 5 times. And I think they need to commit to the running game. And even if things aren't going well, continue to pound it and get the ball into your best players' hands. As far as everything else goes, I think there's probably some lessons learned last week about, certainly we talked about the aggressiveness down in on the goal line, some of the decision-making. And obviously, I think in this week, they're going to need to get, I think Zach Collaros maybe a little bit more involved with some of the play choice and let the quarterback feel comfortable with some of the things that they're doing, at least in the most important moments. Because, as I said, Zach had one of his best games of the year, but with the game on the line, I think in some ways they sort of took it out of his hands with the play call and a design of a play that everyone could see what was coming from miles away, then ended up going the other way. Listen,
couple other things, though, Huss. Sorry to interrupt. Ontario Wilson might be back for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, which might help their cause on offense. We'll see how that plays out. The other thing, too, is it's the second game for Dalton Schoen, which I think is important, right? This guy's missed 6 games, right? And he comes back, he takes that first catch, gets rocked, takes 2 big hits in that game, also scores a touchdown, right? Didn't rack up a bunch of yards. I think he ended up with about 50-something, but found the end zone. So I would be looking for Dalton Schoen to continue to grow off that performance, right? There's a guy who, when he's healthy and when he's going the way we've seen him go, he's one of the best, if not the best receiver in the CFL. So I'm expecting him to take another step. And if they can get Ontario Wilson into that lineup, not to mention Demario Houston is also nearing a return, right? And for an inexperienced secondary that Winnipeg has, getting a veteran like that who can also take the ball away might also be a big advantage for them this week.
I was surprised he didn't play last week, to be honest with you, coming in. I mean, you got Joe Ajo, who was on an NFL team on Wednesday, making an impact in the game. I was a little surprised that they maybe didn't, get a guy like Houston in. But, I mean, overall, not even going to hang this one on the defense. Like, Jeff, if you told me that they would hold Trevor Harris to 219 yards and 1 touchdown, be saying that's probably a Blue Bomber win.
Yeah.
There was a number of things that went into it that didn't happen, why they didn't lose. I'm going to take them in this game to win. This really is truly a pick 'em, and I definitely have ears for the argument that Saskatchewan has a whole nother level of the way that they played last week that we might see on Saturday that could go the other way. But I do think the Bombers are going to be focused. They'll be desperate. And I mean, to me, the biggest difference of this game is to get Brady Oliveira more involved, because I'm not sure Zach Collaros has a bigger game awaiting him than the one that he just put forth. I mean, if you told me that he can throw for 326 and 3 touchdowns in the Banjo Bowl, you'll take that all day long. It's the other elements of the game that need to come together. And as I say, there's no one that'll be more fired up for the Banjo Bowl than Brady Oliveira. I think he has a big, big game. The Bomber offensive line steps up, and that will be the difference. But I certainly do think that we're in for a treat in this one on Saturday. The nightcap is the rematch of the Battle of Alberta, Calgary and Edmonton. Calgary are 6-point favorites going into Commonwealth to take on the Elks. I don't know, Jeff, after watching that game, it just seemed like these two teams are, sort of playing, at very, very different levels. And listen, it's not like Calgary's going into Winnipeg or Saskatchewan for this game. I think they'll have a good crowd for Edmonton, but to me, Calgary's just too damn good right now. And to be honest, I think that was a pretty pedestrian game from Vernon Adams. He said as much afterwards. I think there's another level of the Calgary offense to get to. So I'm going to lay the 6 with Calgary on the road.
Yeah, I'm with you too. This is probably the most confident I am of all these picks. I don't feel really good about any of the 3 prior to. I just think that Calgary has got that mojo. They're going to be as emotionally invested too. And not saying not trying to suggest by suggesting this that any teams take their foot off the gas or whatnot, but Calgary knows they're in a really good position. Calgary feels like the best team in the CFL. There's no doubt in my mind. If you ask Calgary, they're by far the best team in the league. but they're not the best team in the standings right now and not the best team in their own division. So until that's the case, I think they're going to be pushing for this incredibly hard. And I do think that when you look at what we saw in this matchup this past weekend, we're going to see a lot of the same. I just think the Calgary's defense is too hard to score touchdowns against, too hard to build momentum off of. And so I'm with you. I'm riding with Calgary. I think VA is going to have an improved game, which is not good news for Edmonton. Sure, Cody Fajardo might be able to help this team out, but I think this might just be the nail in the coffin for Edmonton here in the sense that if they, technically not eliminated if they lose this weekend, but just given how tough the West is, even with the potential of a crossover, this is a game that they need to win. I still think Calgary, builds on what they did this past week and wins by a touchdown. If that's what you're telling me, they all need to win by one touchdown. I'd take that any day of the week over a team in Edmonton who I would argue is still trying to figure things out.
The red hot Nick Arbuckle and the Argos will sit back at 4-8, hoping that Ottawa will lose and Montreal will lose, and they'll be right in the mix there in the East going into next week. Folks, check out over at CoolBet. We'll cook up, we'll do something for the triple header. We'll take Hamilton and Calgary on the spread. I guess probably take it a half point less just so there's a clear winner. We'll take Winnipeg on the pick'em against the Riders in the Banjo Bowl, and Jake and Pat and the boys will give us a nice boost. So that'll be up in the combo cards over at CoolBet. And Friday night and a Saturday triple header. And then, of course, our first full NFL Sunday. It is a good time to be a football fan, especially a fan of the Canadian Football League, coming off an absolutely amazing Labor Day weekend with great scenes in the stands, on the field, and two absolute thrillers. And then, of course, Calgary's drubbing of Edmonton. Hammer, great time in Regina. Let's do it again on the weekend here in Winnipeg between the two Prairie rivals and 4 big games in the CFL, taking us through the weekend. And I will look forward to seeing you same time at same place next week with another edition of CFL 110 as we get into the home stretch. Thanks for doing this, buddy.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Love chopping these games up. If you listen to us weekly, thank you. If it's your first episode, thank you. Tell a friend. Tell a friend, tell an enemy, tell a family member. Maybe one person counts for all 3 of those. But just let's spread the news. We love doing this show. We love talking about the league. We love chopping it up, and we'd love for you to come back and enjoy it with us. So
hey, just a quick shout out to the Rider fans. That's one of the true great parts about the entire Labor Day weekend. Just how much fun everyone has coming together. There was no BS at all, and frankly, there was a real. Can tell you the amount of times Rider fans thank Bomber fans for coming out, for making that event what it is, and that's exactly what this great league is all about. The road to the Grey Cup continues. We'll see you next week right here on CFL 110. Thanks to Connor Rabchak and all of you for joining us. Have a good one. 4 big games in the league this weekend, and we'll be back next week with more CFL 110 right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk.